The streets of New Chicago buzzed with life as the evening sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was the year 2247, and Earth had changed beyond recognition since humanity joined the Galactic Federation 3 decades ago. Aliens walked alongside humans now as though it was the most natural thing in the world. The tall insectoid Veltharan with their shimmering exoskeletons stood outside cafes sipping drinks through complex straws. The floating airlon drifted past windows of shops that sold goods from 100 different worlds. This was the new normal, and most humans under 40 had never known anything different, Marcus. Green sat with his back against the cold marble wall of the grand, celestial hall. His coat was 3 sizes, too, large and patched in a dozen places with whatever fabric he could find. His beard had grown wild and unkempt over the past few years, and his hair fell in gray tangles past his shoulders. His hands rested on his knees, and those hands told a different story than the rest of him. Despite the grime and the rough calluses, they were elegant hands with long fingers that moved with unconscious grace, even in stillness. Next to him sat a battered violin case covered in stickers from a dozen different concert halls across Earth and beyond. Marcus watched the wealthy patrons arrive for the evening performance. Hovercars touched down softly at the entrance, and well-dressed humans and aliens emerged in their finest clothing. He recognized the signs of wealth in every gesture and every laugh. Once he had been one of them. Once he had walked through those golden doors to thunderous applause. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now. The grand celestial hall rose above him like a monument to everything he had lost. Its walls were constructed from a material that shifted colors based on the music being performed inside. Right now it glowed a soft blue, which meant someone was playing classical human music. Marcus closed his eyes and listened. Even from outside he could hear the faint strains of violin, and he knew immediately that the performer was technically perfect, but emotionally hollow. The notes were all there, but the soul was missing. A group of young people emerged from a luxury hovercar that cost more than Marcus had earned in his entire career. They were loud and careless in the way only the truly wealthy could afford to be. At the center of the group was a young man who carried himself like he owned the world. His name was Kyle Brennan, and in a sense he did own a significant portion of it. His father controlled Brennan Galactic Industries, which had mining operations on 40 different planets and employed over 2 million people across the Federation. Kyle was 25 years old and had never worked a real day in his life. Everything had been handed to him, and it showed in the cruel twist of his mouth and the dismissive way he looked at anyone he considered beneath him. His girlfriend Linda clung to his arm, laughing at jokes that were not funny. His friends surrounded him like satellites orbiting a particularly unpleasant sun. Kyle spotted Marcus, and his eyes lit up with malicious glee. He whispered something to his friends, and they all turned to look. Marcus recognized that look. He had seen it before on the faces of people who found entertainment in the suffering of others. He tried to make himself smaller against the wall, but it was too late. Kyle approached with his entourage trailing behind him. He stood over Marcus and wrinkled his nose in exaggerated disgust. "The old man smells like he hasn't bathed in weeks," he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. His friends laughed on cue. Marcus said nothing and kept his eyes down. Experience had taught him that engaging with people like this only made things worse. But Kyle was not satisfied with being ignored. He nudged the violin case with his expensive shoe. "What's in the box, old man?" he asked. "Is it your lunch, or did you steal something?" Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he remained silent. Kyle kicked the case harder. "I'm talking to you. It is a violin," Marcus said quietly. His voice was rough from disuse, but there was something in it that made Kyle pause for just a moment. It was the voice of someone who had once commanded concert halls. "A violin," Kyle repeated and burst out laughing. His friends joined in as trained. "You expect me to believe a homeless bum owns a violin?" Marcus looked up and met Kyle's eyes. "I was a musician," he said simply. Kyle's grin widened. "Oh, this is perfect," he said. He turned to his friends. "Did you hear that? The bum thinks he's a musician." A crowd was beginning to gather. Humans and aliens alike stopped to watch the scene unfold. Marcus felt his face burn with shame, but something else stirred inside him too. It was anger, cold and sharp after years of being buried. Kyle pulled out a small device and tapped at it. A holographic contract appeared in the air, glowing with legal text. "Tell you what, old man," he said. "I'm feeling generous tonight. If you can play that violin and actually impress me, I'll give you my car." He gestured at the stellar X9000 sitting at the curb. It was sleek and black and worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. His friends gasped at the offer and Linda tugged at his arm, asking if he was serious. Kyle ignored her and kept his eyes on Marcus. But if you can't play or if you're just terrible, then you have to smash that violin right here in front of everyone. Deal. Marcus stared at the holographic contract. The terms were legally binding under Federation law. If he agreed and failed, he would lose the only thing he had left. But if he won, the thought of having a vehicle again, of having shelter and mobility, and a chance to rebuild even the smallest piece of his dignity made his chest ache. The crowd pressed closer. An alien he recognized as a Veltharan ambassador named Kixthor watched with interest. The Veltharan were known throughout the galaxy for their appreciation of music and complex sound patterns. Other aliens whispered among themselves in languages Marcus had once understood, but now could barely remember. He reached for the violin case, and his hands trembled slightly. Kyle noticed and laughed. "Oh, this is going to be good," he said. The old man's already shaking. Marcus unlatched the case and opened it slowly. Inside lay a violin that, despite the worn exterior of its case, gleamed with unexpected quality. The wood was a deep amber color, and even in the fading light it seemed to glow from within. This was no ordinary instrument. It had been handcrafted by a legendary luthier named Giovanni Toretti, who had died 20 years ago. Only 12 of his instruments existed, and collectors would pay fortunes for them. But Marcus had never sold it. Even at his lowest moments, when he was starving and cold, he could not bring himself to part with it. He lifted the violin and something shifted in the air. The crowd's chatter died down. Even Kyle stopped smirking for a moment. Marcus tucked the instrument under his chin, and the weight of it felt like coming home. His left hand found its position on the neck and his right hand gripped the bow. Kyle pulled up another hologram showing a complex piece of sheet music. "This is called the Seventh Spiral," he announced. "It's a Kryn composition from like 3,000 years ago or something." He grinned. "I've been told it's impossible for humans to play. Something about the frequencies and speed being beyond what our species can handle. But hey, if you're such a great musician, this should be easy, right?" Marcus looked at the sheet music floating in the air before him. He recognized it immediately. The Seventh Spiral was indeed considered unplayable by human standards. It required the performer to hit notes at frequencies most humans could not even hear, and to maintain tempos that defied human reflexes. He had studied it once decades ago, back when he was still searching for challenges. The Veltharan ambassador Kixthor stepped forward, clearly surprised. "You know of this piece?" he asked Marcus. His voice had the clicking quality common to his species. Marcus nodded slowly. "I know it," he said quietly. Kyle clapped his hands together. "Perfect," he said. "Then play it. If you can get through even half of it without completely butchering it, I'll call it a win." He winked at his friends. "Not that there's any chance of that happening." Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He thought about everything he had lost. His career, his wife, his home, his identity. He thought about the years of sleeping in doorways and digging through trash for food. He thought about the shame that had become so familiar he barely noticed it anymore. And then he thought about the music, pure and clean and true, the one thing that had never betrayed him even when he had betrayed it. He opened his eyes and looked at the glowing sheet music. His fingers positioned themselves on the strings. The crowd held its breath. Kyle folded his arms across his chest with that insufferable smirk still on his face. Marcus drew the bow across the strings and began to play. The first note rang out clear and pure, cutting through the evening air like a blade. It was perfect in pitch and tone, and it hung in the air for a moment that seemed to stretch impossibly long. Then Marcus's fingers began to move, and what happened next made several people in the crowd gasp out loud. His hands became a blur of motion. The bow danced across the string so fast it should have been physically impossible. Notes cascaded from the violin in a waterfall of sound that built and swirled and climbed toward frequencies that made the humans in the crowd wince, while the aliens leaned forward with intense interest. Marcus's fingers flew up and down the neck of the violin, pressing and releasing with such speed that they seemed to be in multiple places at once. Kyle's smirk began to fade. His friends stopped laughing. Linda let go of his arm and stepped back, her eyes wide. The crowd grew larger as people passing by stopped to listen. More aliens emerged from the grand celestial hall, drawn by the sound. Human patrons in their expensive clothing stood next to working-class families who had been walking home. Street vendors abandoned their posts. Even the hover cars seemed to slow as they passed. Marcus played on, and his eyes were closed now. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air. The music of the seventh spiral was not meant to be beautiful in the traditional human sense. It was mathematical and complex and built on principles of harmonic resonance that human composers had never explored. But in Marcus's hands it became something transcendent. He was not just playing the notes. He was speaking a language that existed beyond words. The Veltharan ambassador Kixthor moved closer. His multifaceted eyes reflected the light from the nearby buildings, and his antennae were standing straight up in a posture that other Veltharan recognized as profound shock. He turned to another alien in the crowd, a floating Airlon, whose species communicated primarily through telepathy. "Are you hearing what I am hearing?" Kixthor asked. The Airlon pulsed with colors that indicated yes. "This is impossible." The Airlon's telepathic voice echoed in the minds of nearby aliens. No human should be able to produce these frequencies. But Marcus was producing them. Notes that vibrated at the very edge of audibility and beyond, mixed with the standard range in a complex weaving pattern. The humans in the crowd could hear only part of what he played. They heard beauty and skill and perfect technical execution. The aliens heard something else entirely. They heard a story being told in pure sound. They heard equations and poetry and emotions that had no names in any spoken language. Marcus's appearance began to change as he played. The grime and weariness seemed to fall away, not physically, but in some other way that was harder to define. He stood straighter. His movements became more fluid. The trembling in his hands was gone, replaced by absolute certainty. This was not a homeless man playing a violin. This was a master performing at the peak of his abilities. Kyle stood frozen. The holographic contract still hovered in the air next to him, displaying the terms he had so confidently set. He had expected humiliation and laughter. He had expected the old man to produce squeaky sounds like a child with a toy. Instead, he was witnessing something that made him feel small and foolish. More people arrived. Someone had started streaming the performance on the local network, and within minutes, thousands of people across New Chicago were watching. In orbit above Earth, 3 alien ships redirected their sensors toward the city. On the bridge of a Kryn diplomatic vessel, the captain stood abruptly. "Get me a visual feed of that location," she commanded. Her crew scrambled to obey. The Kryn were a proud species who valued their cultural heritage above almost everything else. The seventh spiral was one of their most sacred compositions, written by a composer whose name was still honored, 3 millennia after his death. To hear it played by an alien species by a human was unthinkable. Marcus reached the midpoint of the composition where the tempo was supposed to accelerate beyond what human reflexes could manage. Without hesitation, he accelerated. His bow became invisible in the speed of its motion. The violin sang and screamed and whispered all at once. Several humans in the crowd covered their ears, not from pain but from sensory overload. The aliens pressed closer, drawn by something they recognized but had never expected to encounter on Earth. Inside the grand celestial hall, the performance that had been taking place stopped. The audience and performers alike turned their attention to the external feed showing what was happening just outside. The conductor, a melodian whose species existed partially in a dimension of pure music, began to weep. She understood what she was witnessing in a way that few others could. This human had achieved what her people called the transcendence. He had learned to perceive music not as entertainment or even as art, but as a fundamental force of the universe itself. Kyle's girlfriend Linda touched his arm. "We should go," she whispered. This was a mistake, but Kyle could not move. He was trapped by his own pride and by the contract hanging in the air. If he tried to leave now while the performance was still ongoing, he would be breaking the terms he himself had set. Federation law was clear on such matters. He had no choice but to stay and watch his humiliation unfold. Marcus entered the final movement of the seventh spiral. This was the part that even Kryn musicians found challenging. It required the performer to maintain 3 separate melodic lines simultaneously, while also creating a rhythmic pattern that served as percussion. Marcus did all of this, and then he did something that made Kixthor make a sound of disbelief. He added his own variation to the ending. In Kryn culture, this was the highest form of respect. It meant the performer had not just mastered the piece, but understood its soul well enough to contribute to it. Only a handful of non-Kryn musicians had ever been granted the honor of adding to a classical Kryn composition, and none of those musicians had been human. The variation Marcus added was simple, but perfect. He took the main theme and inverted it, creating a mirror image of the melody that intertwined with the original. Then he brought both themes together in a resolution that felt inevitable even though no one had heard it before. It was like watching a mathematician solve an equation that everyone had assumed was unsolvable. The Kryn captain in orbit stood with her hands pressed against the viewing screen. She was crying and she did not care who saw. That human just honored our people in a way that transcends politics or species, she said to her crew. Record everything. This moment must be preserved. On the Galactic Council station 500 light-years away, the council was in session debating trade agreements and border disputes. A junior aide rushed in with a tablet and whispered urgently to the Veltharan council member. The meeting paused. The council member watched the feed from Earth and then requested that it be displayed for the entire chamber. The debate stopped. Representatives from 24 species watched in silence as a human who looked like he owned nothing played music that spoke to the soul of the galaxy itself. Back on the street, Marcus drew out the final note. He held it longer than should have been possible, making it swell and fade and swell again, before finally releasing it into silence. The last vibration hung in the air for 3 heartbeats. Then it was gone. For a moment no one moved. No one spoke. The silence was absolute and profound. Marcus lowered his violin and opened his eyes. He looked exhausted. The performance had taken everything he had. He swayed slightly on his feet but did not fall. Then Kixthor did something that shocked every human present. The Veltharan ambassador dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead to the ground. It was the highest gesture of respect in Veltharan culture, reserved for masters and teachers, and those who had achieved enlightenment. One by one, the other aliens in the crowd followed. Each species performed their own gesture of honor. The airline pulsed with gold light. The 3 Kryn present crossed their forearms over their chests and bowed deeply. A group of harmonics who had been passing by stood perfectly still, which for their species was the equivalent of standing ovation. The humans did not understand all of these gestures, but they understood enough. They began to applaud. The sound started small and then grew into a roar. People cheered and whistled and stamped their feet. Someone shouted bravo. Others took up the cry. The applause rolled on and on. Kyle stood pale and shaking. The holographic contract pulsed gently, reminding him of its presence. He had lost. Not just the bet, but something larger that he could not quite name. He looked at Marcus and saw not a homeless old man, but someone who possessed something Kyle had never had, and never would. Dignity earned through suffering. Mastery achieved through dedication. Purpose that went beyond wealth or status. Marcus stood with his violin hanging loosely from one hand. He looked at Kyle and then at the contract and then at the crowd. His face was unreadable. Marcus looked at Kyle Brennan for a long moment. The young man stood there trying to maintain his composure but failing. His face had gone from its usual arrogant confidence to something closer to panic. The holographic contract floating beside him pulsed with soft blue light, waiting for acknowledgement that the terms had been met. Everyone could see that Marcus had won. The challenge had been clear, and he had exceeded it in every possible way. Kyle reached into his pocket and pulled out the access crystal for his Stellar X9000. His hand shook slightly as he held it out. "The car is yours," he said. His voice was tight and angry, but he was smart enough to know that breaking a public contract would ruin his reputation even more than losing it. Marcus took a step forward, and the crowd grew quiet again, waiting to see what would happen next. But Marcus did not take the crystal. Instead, he carefully placed his violin back in its case and closed the latches. He straightened up, and when he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the silent street. "I do not want your car," he said. Kyle blinked in confusion. The crowd murmured. Linda and Kyle's friends exchanged glances. "What do you mean?" Kyle asked. "You won." "The contract is clear." Marcus shook his head slowly. "I wanted to play again," he said. "For 3 years I have carried this violin and not opened the case. I was afraid that if I played I would remember everything I had lost and the pain would be too much. You gave me a reason to open it. You gave me a reason to face that fear. For that, despite your intentions, I thank you." The words hit Kyle like a physical blow. He had expected anger or triumph or gloating. Instead, he was being thanked. It made what he had done seem even worse somehow. A few people in the crowd who had been filming looked at each other uncomfortably. This was not the ending they had expected. Marcus turned to address the crowd. "I lost myself because I forgot why I played music in the first place," he said. "When I was young, it was about joy and connection. It was about speaking when words were not enough. But somewhere along the way, it became about being the best, about being recognized, about achieving perfection. And when I discovered I could do things that other humans could not do, I became isolated. I could no longer relate to normal music or normal life. My wife left me because I could not communicate without slipping into frequencies she could not hear. My career ended because I could not perform at a level that humans could appreciate. I had become something that did not fit anywhere." He paused and looked down at his violin case. "So I stopped playing. I thought if I could not share this gift with anyone, then what was the point? I let myself fall into nothing. I convinced myself I was better off forgotten." Kicksthor stood up from his kneeling position. His compound eyes gleamed in the light from the street lamps. "You are not forgotten," he said. "What you just did will be remembered across the galaxy. You have achieved something that only 3 other species have ever managed. You have learned the language of pure sound. The harmonics taught you." A ripple went through the crowd. The harmonics were legendary. They were a species of beings who existed as living sound waves who perceived reality as an endless symphony. They were dying out because their young could no longer be born in a universe that had grown too loud with industrial noise and electronic signals. They rarely interacted with other species, and when they did, it was only with those they deemed worthy. Marcus nodded. 20 years ago, a group of harmonics came to Earth, he said. They were searching for someone who could carry on their knowledge. They tested hundreds of musicians across dozens of species. They chose me. I do not know why. They said they saw something in the way I understood silence as well as sound. They spent 5 years teaching me, uploading information directly into my neural pathways. It changed me in ways I did not fully understand at the time. He looked at his hands. I can hear and create sounds across a spectrum that includes frequencies most species cannot even detect. I can process musical information thousands of times faster than a normal human. But the gift came with a cost. Everything else seemed dull and meaningless. Food had no taste. Colors seemed washed out. Human music sounded like children banging on pots. I could not connect with anyone. His voice grew softer. My wife tried to understand. She was patient for years, but eventually she realized I was gone even when I was standing right in front of her. I had become something that looked human but was not human anymore. She left, and I did not blame her. My colleagues in the orchestra tried to help, but I could not explain what had happened. How do you tell someone that their very presence is painful because their heartbeat is slightly out of rhythm or their breathing creates interference patterns that make you physically ill? The crowd listened in absolute silence. Even the traffic seemed to have stopped. Marcus continued his story. I tried to perform, but every concert became torture. I would play what the audience wanted, but all I could hear was how inadequate it was. Like a poet forced to communicate only in grunts. I started making mistakes on purpose because perfect performances made people uncomfortable. They could sense something was wrong even if they could not articulate what it was. Eventually, I just walked away from everything. A woman in the crowd called out. "But you just played perfectly, why now?" "Why, after 3 years," Marcus smiled sadly. "Because this young man," he gestured at Kyle, "gave me a challenge that required me to use what I had been given. The 7th spiral cannot be played at a human level. To perform it, I had to stop pretending to be something I am not. And in doing that, I remembered something important. The harmonics did not give me this ability so I could be isolated. They gave it to me so I could bridge the gap between species. I was supposed to help others understand what they were hearing, not retreat into silence." Kicksthor stepped closer. "Will you play again?" he asked. "Not just now, but in the future. The galaxy needs what you can do." Before Marcus could answer, the doors to the Grand Celestial Hall opened. A woman emerged, walking with purpose and authority. She was in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore a formal suit that marked her as someone important. The crowd parted for her automatically. Marcus recognized her immediately, and his eyes widened. Patricia Wells stopped a few feet away from him. "Mr. Green," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was emotion beneath it. "I have been looking for you for 5 years." Marcus stared at her, unable to speak. Patricia Wells was the director of the Grand Celestial Hall. She was one of the most powerful figures in Earth's cultural scene, with connections that reached across the Federation. She controlled which artists performed, which events happened, and which cultural exchanges were approved. She had discovered dozens of talents and launched careers that spanned multiple worlds. When you disappeared, Patricia continued, I tried everything to find you. I hired investigators. I contacted everyone you had ever worked with. I searched shelters and hospitals and police records. You vanished completely, why? Marcus asked. His voice was barely above a whisper. Why were you looking for me? Patricia smiled. Because I needed someone who could do what you just did. Someone who could bridge human and alien artistic expression. Someone who understood music not just as entertainment, but as communication across species barriers. I wanted to offer you a position as the master of ceremonies for alien cultural events at the hall. But you were gone, and after 3 years I had given up hope of ever finding you. She pulled out a tablet and tapped at it. A message displayed on its screen. This arrived from the Galactic Council approximately 10 minutes ago while you were playing. They have been watching your performance through our external feeds and through the sensors of ships in orbit. They are offering Earth the honor of hosting the Festival of 10,000 Worlds next year. The crowd erupted in shocked exclamations. The festival was the biggest cultural event in the entire Federation. It happened once every 5 years and moved between different worlds. It brought together artists and performers from every known species for a month-long celebration of art, music, dance, and creative expression. Billions watched the broadcasts. Entire economies were boosted by the tourism and attention, and it had never been hosted on a planet whose species had joined the Federation within the last century. Patricia continued. The Council specifically requests that you serve as the artistic director. They say that anyone who can honor the Kryn people the way you just did is worthy of organizing an event that represents all cultures. They are prepared to provide whatever resources you need. Marcus felt dizzy. This was too much too fast. An hour ago he had been a homeless man sitting against a wall. Now he was being offered a position that would make him one of the most visible humans in the galaxy. Patricia seemed to sense his overwhelm. The position comes with a full staff, she said gently. You would have assistants and coordinators and experts in alien cultures. You would have housing in the hall's master suite. A salary package that includes healthcare, retirement benefits, and yes, a company vehicle for transportation. Nothing as flashy as a stellar X9000, but reliable. She paused and looked directly into his eyes. Most importantly, you would have a purpose. You would be helping the galaxy understand what humanity has to offer. You would be using your gifts in the way they were meant to be used. You would not be alone anymore. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause that seemed to shake the very ground. Humans and aliens celebrated together, united in witnessing something that transcended the ordinary boundaries of their lives. Patricia Wells smiled and extended her hand to Marcus. He took it and she pulled him into a brief professional embrace. Welcome back, Mr. Green, she said quietly so only he could hear. We have missed you. Marcus pulled away and wiped his eyes. He looked around at the faces in the crowd and saw joy and excitement and hope reflected back at him. These people had come to mock or to watch entertainment, and instead they had witnessed a resurrection. He felt the weight of expectation settling on his shoulders, but for the first time in years it did not feel crushing. It felt right. Patricia turned to address the crowd. The Grand Celestial Hall will be hosting a press conference tomorrow at noon to discuss Earth's hosting of the Festival of 10,000 Worlds. Mr. Green will be available to answer questions at that time. For now, I think he needs rest and privacy. She looked at the various recording devices and cameras. I am sure you all have plenty of footage to share. The crowd began to disperse slowly, reluctantly, as though leaving would break the spell of what they had witnessed. Kixthor approached Marcus one more time. I will be sending a formal invitation for you to visit the Veltheran homeworld, he said. Our musicians would be honored to learn from you. Marcus nodded, his gratitude too deep for words. As the aliens and most of the humans filtered away, Kyle Brennan remained standing in the same spot. His friends had already left, embarrassed by association. Linda had disappeared into a waiting hovercar without saying goodbye. Kyle held the access crystal to his stellar X9000 in his hand and stared at it as though he had forgotten what it was. Marcus noticed him standing there and walked over. Patricia watched but did not interfere. Kyle looked up as Marcus approached, and there was something raw and vulnerable in his expression. I am sorry, Kyle said. The words came out stiff and awkward, like he was not used to apologizing. I was cruel. I thought it would be funny to humiliate you. I did not think. Marcus studied the young man for a moment. You are right, he said. You did not think. But you are young, and the young make mistakes. The question is whether you learn from them. Kyle looked at the ground. My father is going to kill me when he sees the videos. Everyone is going to see what I did. My reputation. Your reputation is the least important thing here, Marcus interrupted. What matters is who you choose to be from this moment forward. You can spend your life worried about what others think, or you can actually become someone worth thinking about. Kyle met his eyes. How do I do that? Marcus smiled slightly. Come see me at the hall next week. I am going to need an administrative assistant. Someone who understands business and contracts and how to deal with wealthy donors. Someone who is not afraid to tell me when I am being impractical. Someone who perhaps needs to learn that real value is not measured in credits or possessions. Kyle stared at him in shock. You are offering me a job. After what I just did, Marcus nodded. Yes, because I believe people can change. Because someone once gave me a chance when I did not deserve it. And because I think underneath all that arrogance is a person who might actually care about something bigger than himself, if given the right push. Why would you do this? Kyle asked. His voice cracked slightly. I do not deserve kindness from you. No, you do not, Marcus agreed. But that is the point of kindness. It is not something you earn. It is something freely given. What you do with it is up to you. Kyle stood there processing this. Finally, he nodded. I will be there, he said. Next week, I promise. He hesitated, then added, Thank you. Marcus watched as Kyle walked to his expensive car and drove away. Patricia came to stand beside him. That was either very wise or very foolish, she said. Perhaps both, Marcus replied. But I meant what I said. Everyone deserves a chance to become better. Besides, I genuinely will need someone who understands how to navigate corporate politics and funding structures. He might actually be useful if he can get past his own ego. Patricia chuckled. Fair enough. Now come inside. I have a suite prepared for you, and you look like you're about to collapse. Marcus realized she was right. The performance had drained him completely. The adrenaline was wearing off, and his legs felt like water. He picked up his violin case and followed Patricia into the grand celestial hall. As he crossed the threshold, he felt something shift inside him. He was entering not as a visitor or a memory, but as someone who belonged. The interior of the hall was even more magnificent than he remembered. The walls still shifted colors, but now they responded to his presence, turning a warm gold. Patricia noticed his expression. The building is semi-sentient, she explained. It is made from a Melodian biostructure that responds to artistic talent. It recognizes you. They took an elevator to the top floor where the master suite occupied the entire level. Patricia opened the door and gestured for Marcus to enter. The space was larger than some apartments, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over New Chicago. There was a living area, a full kitchen, a bedroom, and most importantly, a soundproof music room with instruments from a dozen different species mounted on the walls. This is yours. For as long as you work here, Patricia said. There are clothes in the closet that should fit, food in the kitchen, a computer terminal linked to the hall's main systems. Tomorrow we will start going over the details of the festival, but tonight just rest. Marcus set his violin case down carefully on a table. Thank you, he said, for everything. For searching for me, for not giving up. Patricia smiled. You were worth finding. Now get some sleep. We have a lot of work ahead of us. She left, and Marcus was alone for the first time in a space that was his. He walked slowly through the rooms, touching furniture and looking at the view. It felt surreal, like a dream he might wake up from at any moment. He went into the bathroom and saw himself in the mirror for the first time in months. The face looking back at him was gaunt and weathered, but the eyes were alive again. He showered for the first time in weeks, letting hot water wash away layers of grime and shame. He found clothes in the closet as promised and dressed in simple, comfortable garments. Then he went to the kitchen and made himself tea. The act of preparing something hot and safe brought tears to his eyes again. Such a simple thing, and yet it felt like a luxury beyond measure. As he sat by the window drinking his tea, Marcus thought about the path that had brought him here. The years of training and dedication, the gift from the harmonics that had been both blessing and curse, the long fall into despair, and now this unexpected redemption offered by a cruel young man who had unwittingly given him back his purpose. He thought about Kyle Brennan and wondered if the boy would actually show up next week. Part of Marcus hoped he would. Everyone deserved a chance to be better than their worst moment. He had been given that chance tonight, and it seemed only right to pass it forward. The city lights sparkled below him, and above the stars shone clear and bright. Ships moved in orbit carrying beings from worlds he had never seen. Tomorrow he would begin preparing for the festival. He would coordinate with artists and diplomats. He would help show the galaxy what humanity had to offer. But tonight he was simply Marcus Green, a man who had been lost and was now found. He finished his tea and went to the music room. His violin case sat where he had left it. He opened it and lifted the instrument. The weight of it in his hands felt like an old friend returning. He tucked it under his chin and began to play. Not the seventh spiral or any formal composition, just simple melodies that came from his heart. Songs his mother had sung to him as a child. Folk tunes he had learned before conservatory training had made him serious and technical. The building responded. The walls glowed brighter and the colors shifted in patterns that matched the music. Marcus played, and for the first time in years he felt whole. The loneliness that had consumed him for so long began to ease. He was still different, still changed by what the harmonics had given him. But different did not have to mean isolated. He could use his gifts to build bridges instead of walls. As he played, Marcus thought about the festival and all it would require. He would need to coordinate performances from thousands of artists. He would need to balance the cultural sensitivities of dozens of species. He would need to create a schedule that showcased the best of what the galaxy had to offer, while giving special attention to human contributions. It was a massive undertaking that would consume the next year of his life. But he was ready. More than ready. He was eager. This was what he had been preparing for his entire life, even if he had not known it. Every hour of practice, every concert, every moment of suffering had led to this. He would make the festival something that brought the galaxy together. He would show that humanity, despite being young and small and relatively primitive, had something precious to contribute to the greater community of worlds. Marcus played until his fingers ached and his shoulders burned. Then he carefully put the violin away and went to bed. As he lay in the darkness looking up at the ceiling, he felt peace settle over him like a blanket. Tomorrow would bring challenges and stress and probably moments of doubt. But tonight he could rest knowing that he had found his way back to himself and to his purpose. Marcus woke to sunlight streaming through the massive windows of his new suite. For a moment he lay still, trying to remember where he was. The bed was soft and warm and clean, and his body ached in ways that had nothing to do with sleeping on cold concrete. He sat up slowly and looked around at the elegant room. Yesterday had not been a dream. He was really here. He showered again simply because he could and dressed in fresh clothes from the closet. In the kitchen he found ingredients for breakfast and cooked himself eggs and toast. The simple act of preparing food in a real kitchen moved him almost to tears. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, and drank coffee that tasted like heaven. At 9 a.m, there was a knock on his door. Marcus opened it to find Patricia Wells standing there with 2 assistants carrying tablets and equipment. "Good morning," she said with a smile. "I hope you slept well. We have a lot to cover before the press conference at noon." Marcus invited them in and they set up in his living room. Patricia's assistants were named Claire and Ben, and they were both young and efficient. Claire was in charge of scheduling and logistics, while Ben handled media relations and public communications. They both looked at Marcus with barely concealed excitement. Patricia began laying out the reality of what was ahead. "The Festival of 10,000 Worlds typically takes 5 years to plan," she said. "We have just over 12 months. This is going to be the most intense project any of us have ever undertaken. The Galactic Council is providing funding, but we will need to secure additional sponsors. We will need venues across the entire city and possibly beyond. We will need to coordinate with immigration for the thousands of aliens who will be arriving. We will need security teams, cultural advisors, and medical staff capable of handling dozens of different species." She pulled up a holographic display showing a preliminary schedule. "The festival runs for 30 days. Each day features performances from multiple species. There are concerts, visual art exhibitions, dance performances, theatrical productions, poetry readings, and interactive experiences. We need to create a schedule that gives appropriate attention to each participating culture while also ensuring that audiences can experience a wide variety without becoming overwhelmed." Marcus studied the display. His mind, which had been dormant for years, began to engage with the problem. "The key is thematic organization," he said slowly. "Instead of organizing by species, we organize by emotional or conceptual themes. Day 1 could be about beginnings and creation myths. Day 2 about loss and remembrance. Day 3 about joy and celebration. Each theme gets performances from multiple species that approach it from their unique cultural perspective. Patricia's eyes lit up. That is brilliant. It creates narrative coherence while showcasing diversity. Claire, make a note of that. We will need to start categorizing known performances by theme. They worked for 3 hours going through preliminary lists of confirmed participants and potential venues. Marcus learned that over 200 species had already expressed interest in performing. Some wanted large stages for elaborate productions. Others needed intimate spaces for subtle artistry. A few required environmental conditions that would be challenging to create on Earth, such as zero gravity or extreme temperatures. Ben brought up the media situation. The video from last night has gone viral across the Federation, he said. You have been viewed over 3 billion times in the last 12 hours. Every major news network wants an interview. Social media is exploding with discussions about human musical capability and what this means for Earth's cultural standing. He pulled up some of the comments. Most were positive, but there was also controversy. Some aliens felt that a human should not be in charge of such an important event. Others argued that Marcus's performance proved humans had earned the right. There were debates about whether the Harmonics had been right to share their knowledge with him, and whether his abilities were natural or artificial. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the attention. I am not comfortable being the face of this, he said. The festival should be about the artists, not about me. Patricia shook her head. You are part of the story now, whether you like it or not, but we can manage the narrative. At the press conference today, we focus on the festival itself and on Earth's gratitude for being chosen to host. We acknowledge your role, but emphasize that this is a team effort involving hundreds of people. They prepared talking points and practiced responses to difficult questions. Marcus had never been good at public speaking, but Patricia coached him patiently. Just be yourself, she said. Be honest and humble. People respond to authenticity. At 11:30, they headed down to the main auditorium where the press conference would be held. As they walked through the halls of the Grand Celestial Hall, Marcus saw staff members setting up equipment and coordinating preparations. Many of them stopped to stare at him. A few came over to introduce themselves and express their excitement about working on the festival. The auditorium was packed. Reporters from dozens of human news organizations filled the seats, and several alien journalists stood in designated areas equipped with translation devices. Cameras floated in the air, capturing every angle. Marcus felt his stomach clench with anxiety, but he forced himself to walk confidently to the stage. Patricia spoke first, providing an overview of the festival and what it would mean for Earth. She outlined the economic benefits, the cultural exchange, opportunities, and the diplomatic significance. Then she introduced Marcus as the artistic director and invited him to speak. Marcus stepped up to the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. For a moment, his mind went blank. Then he thought about why he was here, and what this opportunity meant not just for him but for all of humanity. He began to speak. Yesterday I was homeless, he said. His voice carried clearly through the sound system. I had given up on everything that mattered to me. But someone challenged me, and that challenge reminded me who I was and what I was capable of. That is what this festival represents for all of us. It is a challenge and an opportunity. The galaxy is asking if humanity has something valuable to contribute to the great conversation of cultures. Our answer must be yes, and we must prove it through our actions, he continued. Over the next year, we will work with artists from across the Federation to create an experience that celebrates what makes each species unique, while also highlighting what connects us all. Music and art and story are universal languages. They allow us to share joy and pain and wonder across barriers that words cannot cross. This festival will show that humanity understands this truth and is committed to being a voice in the galactic chorus. The reporters began shouting questions. Marcus answered as best he could. He talked about his background and his training. He acknowledged the gift the Harmonics had given him, but emphasized that human musical talent existed long before his enhancement. He discussed the themes he wanted to explore and the kinds of performances he hoped to feature. He admitted that the timeline was aggressive, but expressed confidence in his team. One reporter asked about the controversy surrounding his appointment. Mr. Green, do you think a human is qualified to organize an event that represents 200 alien species? Marcus met the reporter's eyes. I think the right question is whether anyone regardless of species is qualified for such a task. The answer is no. No single being can fully understand every culture or appreciate every art form. That is why I will be working with cultural advisors from across the Federation. My role is not to impose my vision, but to create a framework that allows each culture to shine. I am qualified not because I am human, or because I have special abilities, but because I understand that the best art comes from collaboration and respect. Another reporter asked about his homelessness. Why did you end up on the streets when you clearly had extraordinary talent? Marcus paused. This was a more personal question. I became homeless because I lost my way, he said finally. I let my abilities isolate me. I forgot that talent without connection is meaningless. I hope my story shows that no matter how far someone falls, there is always a path back. But it requires the willingness to be vulnerable and to accept help from others. The press conference lasted an hour. By the end, Marcus felt exhausted but also energized. He had faced the scrutiny and survived. More importantly, he had articulated a vision that seemed to resonate with people. As he left the stage, several reporters approached him individually requesting follow-up interviews. Patricia's team politely scheduled them for later dates. Back in his suite, Marcus collapsed on the couch. Claire brought him water and a light lunch. You did well, she said. The initial reaction on social media is very positive. People appreciate your honesty. Marcus thanked her and ate in silence. He was thinking about all the work ahead. The festival was real now. It had been announced publicly and expectations were high. The pressure was immense, but he welcomed it. Pressure meant purpose, and purpose was what he had been missing for so long. That evening, Patricia returned with news. The Galactic Council wants to set up a liaison committee, she said. Representatives from major participating species will meet with you monthly to discuss progress and address concerns. It is both an honor and a bureaucratic headache. You will need to navigate different cultural expectations and political agendas. Kyle Brennan arrived at the Grand Celestial Hall at exactly 9 in the morning. He wore a simple suit without any of the flashy accessories he normally favored. His hair was neatly combed and his expression was serious. The receptionist directed him to Marcus's office, which was a modest space on the 3rd floor with windows overlooking the city. Marcus was already there reviewing holographic displays of potential performance venues. He looked up as Kyle entered and gestured to a chair. Sit down, he said. Kyle sat, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Finally, Kyle broke the silence. I watched the press conference yesterday, he said. You were good. You made people believe in this festival and in humanity. I did not expect that. Marcus smiled slightly. What did you expect? Kyle looked uncomfortable. I do not know. I guess I thought you would be angry still. That you might humiliate me the way I tried to humiliate you. Instead, you offered me a job and then you said all those things about second chances. It made me realize how small I have been. Marcus set aside his work and gave Kyle his full attention. Why did you come back? He asked. You could have just disappeared. Your family has enough money that you never need to work. Why accept a job from someone you tried to hurt? Kyle took a breath. Because I do not want to be that person anymore. The person who finds entertainment in cruelty. I have been thinking about what you said. About becoming someone worth thinking about instead of worrying about what others think. I want to try. I do not know if I can change, but I want to try. Marcus nodded. Good. That is the only qualification that matters. He pulled up a new display showing organizational charts and budget projections. Let me tell you what this job actually involves. You will be my administrative assistant, which means you handle things I do not have time for. Scheduling meetings, coordinating with sponsors, managing budgets, dealing with vendors and contractors. You will also need to learn about alien cultures and customs because you will be interacting with representatives from dozens of species. He continued. The pay is modest compared to what you are probably used to. The hours will be brutal, especially as we get closer to the festival. You will be yelled at by stressed artists and demanding bureaucrats. Your father will probably be disappointed that you are working in what he considers a low-status position, and if you mess up, the consequences could affect the entire project. Kyle listened carefully. What do I need to do to start? Marcus smiled. First, you need to understand that you are not just working for me. You are working for the festival and for Earth's reputation. That means putting ego aside and focusing on the mission. Second, you need to be willing to learn. I will teach you about music and culture, but you need to come with an open mind. Third, you need to be honest. If you do not understand something, say so. If you make a mistake, admit it. Trust is everything in this work, Kyle nodded. I can do that. I will do that, good, Marcus said. Then you start now. He handed Kyle a tablet. Here is a list of potential sponsors who have expressed interest in funding the festival. I need you to research each one. Find out what their business interests are, what their reputation is like, and whether they have any connections to particular alien species. We need sponsors who will support the festival without trying to control it. Kyle took the tablet and looked at the list. There were over 50 names, including some of the biggest corporations in the Federation. This is going to take days, he said. Yes, Marcus agreed. Welcome to event planning. Claire and Ben will help you get set up with an office and access to the databases you will need. We have a team meeting every morning at 8 to coordinate activities. Do not be late, Kyle stood. Thank you, he said, for this chance. I will not let you down. We will see, Marcus said. But I believe you mean it, and that is a start. Over the following weeks, Kyle proved himself to be a surprisingly capable assistant. He worked long hours without complaint and approached each task with genuine effort. He made mistakes, of course, but he learned from them. More importantly, he began to change in subtle ways. The arrogance faded. The cruel humor disappeared. He started asking questions about the music and the cultures they were working with. He attended performances and studied recordings. Marcus watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. He had taken a risk on Kyle and it seemed to be paying off. But more than that, he had given someone the same kind of second chance that had been given to him. It felt right. The preparations for the festival accelerated. Marcus met with the Galactic Council Liaison Committee every month as required. These meetings were exhausting exercises in diplomatic navigation. Each species had its own priorities and concerns. The Kryn wanted assurance that their classical works would be treated with appropriate reverence. The Airlon insisted on having performances in high-altitude venues that mimicked their homeworld's thin atmosphere. The Melodians required spaces that could be tuned to specific acoustic properties. Marcus listened to each concern and found ways to accommodate them. He was learning that his role was as much political as artistic. He had to balance competing interests and manage expectations while still maintaining the integrity of his vision. It was challenging, but he discovered he had a talent for it. Perhaps the years of conducting orchestras had prepared him for coordinating diverse groups toward a common goal. 3 months into the planning, Patricia approached him with news. We have a problem, she said. The Kryn have requested that you perform at the opening ceremony. They want you to play the 7th spiral again as a way of honoring their culture and setting the tone for the festival. Marcus felt his stomach drop. I am not comfortable performing, he said. I agreed to organize, not to be a performer. Patricia sat down. I know, but the Kryn are insistent. They say your performance demonstrated a level of respect and understanding that they rarely see from other species. Having you perform would be a powerful statement about cultural exchange and mutual appreciation. The council supports the request. Marcus stood and walked to the window. He understood the political reasoning, but the thought of performing in front of billions of viewers terrified him. What if he failed? What if the pressure was too much? What if his abilities had been a fluke? Patricia seemed to read his thoughts. You will not fail, she said gently, and even if something goes wrong, the attempt itself would be meaningful. Sometimes the act of trying is more important than perfect execution. Marcus turned to face her. Let me think about it. Take your time, Patricia said. But we need an answer within the week. That night, Marcus sat in his music room with his violin. He had been practicing regularly to keep his skills sharp, but he had avoided thinking about public performance. Now he had to confront that fear directly. He placed the sheet music for the 7th spiral on the stand and began to play. The notes came easily. His fingers remembered the patterns and his mind grasped the complex structures without effort. But as he played, he realized something. He was not afraid of failing technically. He was afraid of exposing himself emotionally. Performance required vulnerability. It required opening yourself to judgment and criticism. For years he had hidden from that vulnerability, and the thought of stepping back into it was terrifying. He stopped playing and sat in silence. Then he thought about Kyle Brennan and the transformation he was witnessing. Kyle had been willing to expose his flaws and work to change. He had accepted vulnerability as the price of growth. Could Marcus do any less? The next morning, Marcus told Patricia he would perform at the opening ceremony. She smiled and squeezed his shoulder. You will be magnificent, she said. Word of Marcus's performance spread quickly. Media coverage intensified. Ticket sales for the festival, which had been strong already, went through the roof. Species that had been undecided about participating suddenly confirmed their attendance. The opening ceremony was shaping up to be one of the most watched events in galactic history. As the months passed, the festival began to take concrete shape. Venues were secured and modified to accommodate different species' needs. Artists arrived on Earth for preliminary meetings and rehearsals. Cultural advisors from across the Federation came to assist with protocol and logistics. The city of New Chicago transformed itself with decorations and infrastructure improvements designed to welcome visitors from across the stars. Marcus worked 18-hour days coordinating the countless details. He met with performers to discuss their needs. He reviewed schedules to ensure smooth transitions between events. He resolved conflicts when artists clashed over staging or timing. He gave interviews to media outlets explaining his vision. He attended diplomatic functions to maintain relationships with alien representatives. Through it all, Kyle was at his side. The young man had become indispensable. He managed the administrative chaos with growing competence. He anticipated problems before they became crises. He learned to communicate effectively with aliens whose body language and social cues were completely different from human norms. Marcus found himself relying on Kyle's judgment and trusting his decisions. One evening, 6 months into the planning, they were working late in Marcus's office. Kyle was reviewing sponsor contracts while Marcus finalized the performance schedule for week 3 of the festival. Kyle suddenly spoke up. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said. Marcus looked up. Of course. The Festival of 10,000 Worlds arrived with the full force of galactic attention focused on Earth. Ships filled the orbit around the planet carrying visitors from every corner of the Federation. New Chicago had been transformed into a showcase of human hospitality, with specialized districts created to accommodate different environmental needs. There were underwater venues for aquatic species, pressurized domes for those who required different atmospheric compositions, temperature-controlled zones for beings who lived in extreme heat or cold. The opening ceremony was scheduled for the evening of the first day. Marcus had been preparing for his performance for months, but as the hour approached, he felt terror threatening to overwhelm him. He stood backstage in the Grand Celestial Hall holding his violin and trying to control his breathing. The auditorium was filled to capacity with 10,000 beings from across the galaxy. Billions more were watching through live broadcasts that reached every inhabited system in the Federation. Patricia found him in the preparation room. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Terrified, Marcus admitted. "What if I fail? What if I embarrass Earth in front of the entire galaxy?" Patricia smiled. "Then you will have given everyone a good story to tell, but you will not fail. You have performed this piece before and you will perform it again. Trust yourself." Kyle appeared at the door. 5 minutes, he said. "The council representatives are in their seats. The Kryn ambassador is crying already and you have not even started." Marcus managed a weak laugh. "That is either a good sign or a very bad one." Kyle stepped closer. "You changed my life," he said quietly. "You saw something in me that I did not see in myself. You gave me purpose when I had nothing but money and arrogance. Whatever happens out there, you have already succeeded in the most important way. You reminded people that we are all capable of becoming better than we are." Marcus felt emotion rise in his throat. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. You have become someone I am proud to know." The stage manager called for Marcus. It was time. He walked through the corridors backstage, hearing the murmur of thousands of voices speaking hundreds of languages. He reached the wings and looked out at the stage. It was vast and beautiful, with lighting designed to showcase performers from any species. At the center was a simple platform where he would stand. The lights dimmed. The crowd fell silent. A holographic display appeared above the stage showing the symbol of the Galactic Federation, surrounded by the emblems of all participating species. Then Patricia walked out to introduce the ceremony. She spoke about the history of the festival and the significance of Earth being chosen to host. She talked about the power of art to unite diverse peoples. She thanked the countless individuals who had worked to make the event possible. Then she introduced Marcus. "Our artistic director is a man who embodies the themes of this festival. He has experienced loss and isolation, but found redemption through his art. He has been touched by another species and used that gift to build bridges instead of walls. Tonight he will perform a piece that represents respect across cultures and the courage to attempt the impossible. Please welcome Marcus Green. The applause was deafening. Marcus walked onto the stage and the lights followed him. He reached the platform and looked out at the audience. He could see humans and aliens sitting together. He saw the Kryn ambassador in the front row with tears streaming down her face. He saw Kixthor the Veltherin who had witnessed his first performance months ago. He saw Kyle and Claire and Ben and all the staff who had worked so hard to make this moment possible. Marcus raised his violin, and the crowd grew silent. He took a breath and began to play the seventh spiral. The music flowed from him like water from a spring. Every note was perfect. His fingers moved with impossible speed and precision. The frequencies he produced ranged from subsonic rumbles that humans could only feel to ultrasonic harmonics that only certain aliens could perceive. He was not just playing music. He was speaking in the language of the harmonics. He was telling a story about loneliness and connection, about falling and rising, about the courage it takes to be vulnerable. As he played, the stage began to respond. The Grand Celestial Hall was a living structure, and it recognized what Marcus was doing. The walls glowed and shifted through colors that matched the emotional content of the music. Blue for sorrow, gold for joy, purple for wonder. The building itself became part of the performance, amplifying and enriching the sound. In the audience, beings from across the galaxy experienced the music according to their own perceptions. Humans heard beauty and technical mastery. The Kryn heard their ancestral heritage honored and expanded. The Melodians heard mathematical perfection and emotional truth combined. The Erlon perceived patterns in the sound that corresponded to their understanding of cosmic structure. Each species found something meaningful in the performance, but they all shared the experience of being moved by something larger than themselves. Marcus reached the midpoint of the piece where he had added his own variation. This time he expanded it further. He wove in motifs from human classical music, brief quotes from Bach and Mozart and Beethoven. He added rhythms from African drums and Asian strings and Native American flutes. He was showing that human music had its own long tradition and its own unique voice. He was claiming Earth's place in the galactic conversation, while honoring the traditions that had come before. The Kryn ambassador stood. It was a breach of protocol, but she could not remain seated. Her 4 arms crossed over her chest in the highest gesture of respect her species possessed. One by one, other aliens followed her example. Soon, half the audience was standing, performing their various cultural gestures of honor. Marcus played on, unaware of the reaction. He was lost in the music in that place where thought and feeling merged into pure expression. He was channeling everything he had learned from the harmonics and everything he had experienced as a human. The grief of loss, the joy of love, the pain of isolation, the relief of connection. All of it poured through him and into the violin and out into the vast auditorium. He approached the ending, and instead of the formal resolution he had planned, he made a spontaneous decision. He extended the final phrase and opened it up as an invitation. Then he stopped playing and looked out at the audience. In the silence, he spoke using the frequency modulation the harmonics had taught him. His words carried across species barriers, reaching those who could perceive them. "Join me," he said in that universal language. "Let us create the ending together." For a moment, nothing happened. Then a melodian in the audience began to sing. Her voice was crystalline and pure, and it picked up the melodic line Marcus had left hanging. A Kryn musician pulled out a traditional instrument and added a counter-melody. An Erlon began to hum, creating a drone that anchored the harmonies. More voices and instruments joined in. Humans who could not perceive the full range of what was being created still felt compelled to participate. They clapped or stomped or added their own vocal lines. The Grand Celestial Hall responded to this unprecedented collaboration. The walls blazed with light that shifted through every color in the spectrum. The acoustic properties of the space adjusted dynamically to balance and enhance every contribution. What emerged was not chaos, but a magnificent improvised composition that represented the diversity and unity of the galactic community. Marcus added his violin back into the mix. He wove between the other voices, supporting and highlighting and connecting. He was no longer the soloist, but part of an ensemble. The music built and swelled until it seemed to fill not just the auditorium, but the entire city. People watching on screens across Earth and across the galaxy felt the power of it. This was what the festival was meant to be. Not a showcase of individual talents, but a celebration of what could be achieved when different voices came together. The improvisation reached a natural conclusion. The final note held by Marcus's violin, and supported by 1,000 other voices and instruments, faded slowly into silence. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then the applause began, and it was like thunder. People cheered and cried and embraced strangers sitting next to them. The ovation lasted for 10 minutes. Marcus stood on the stage overwhelmed. He had set out to honor the Kryn and to represent Earth well. What had happened instead was something far more profound. He had facilitated a moment of genuine connection across species barriers. He had shown that music could indeed be a universal language when approached with respect and openness. Backstage after the ceremony, Marcus was surrounded by well-wishers. Ambassadors and artists and officials all wanted to speak with him. He shook hands and accepted compliments and tried to be gracious despite his exhaustion. Patricia finally rescued him and led him to a quiet room where he could rest. "You did it," she said simply. "You showed them what humanity has to offer." Marcus shook his head. "It was not just me. Everyone who participated made it what it was. That is the real lesson. We are stronger together than we are alone." Over the next 30 days, the festival unfolded according to the schedule Marcus and his team had created. There were concerts and exhibitions and performances of every kind. Some events were formal and traditional. Others were experimental and shocking. There were moments of profound beauty and moments of confusion when cultural differences led to misunderstandings. The final performance of the Festival of 10,000 Worlds was given by a collective of young artists from 20 different species. They had met during the festival and formed connections despite having no common language or cultural background. Together they had created a new piece that blended elements from all their traditions. It was rough and imperfect, but it was filled with genuine emotion and the joy of discovery. Marcus watched from the wings and felt tears streaming down his face. This was what he had hoped for when he accepted the role of artistic director. Not perfection, but connection. Not dominance of one culture over others, but genuine exchange and mutual enrichment. The festival had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. When the final applause faded and the lights came up for the last time, Marcus walked onto the stage to deliver closing remarks. He looked out at the audience, which had grown even larger for the final ceremony. Every seat was filled and people stood in the aisles and crowded the doorways. He saw familiar faces and strangers. He saw humans and aliens united in their appreciation for what they had experienced together. "Thank you," Marcus began. His voice was amplified through speakers and translated into hundreds of languages simultaneously. "Thank you for coming to Earth. Thank you for sharing your art and your cultures with us. Thank you for taking a chance on a young species that is still learning its place in the galaxy." He paused and gathered his thoughts. "A year ago, I was a broken man who had given up on life. I had lost everything that mattered to me, and I believed I had nothing left to offer the world. Then a young man challenged me in a moment of cruelty, and that challenge saved my life. It reminded me that we are all capable of change. That redemption is always possible if we are willing to be vulnerable and to accept help from others." Marcus looked directly at Kyle, who stood near the front. "That young man is here tonight. He came to work for me as penance for his actions, but he stayed because he discovered purpose. He learned that true worth comes not from wealth or status, but from contributing to something larger than yourself. He represents what is best about humanity, our capacity to grow and to change and to become better than we were." He turned his attention back to the full audience. "This festival has shown me that every species shares this capacity. We all make mistakes. We all carry scars. We all struggle with fear and doubt. But we also all have the ability to create beauty and to connect with others and to find meaning in our existence. That is the true lesson of these past 30 days. Marcus gestured to the stage behind him. "Earth is honored to have hosted this festival, but we are also humbled by it. We have learned so much from you. We have been challenged and inspired and transformed by your presence. My hope is that what we have built here will continue long after the festival ends, that the friendships formed and the collaborations begun will grow and flourish, that we will continue to learn from each other and to celebrate both our differences and our commonalities." He raised his hands in a gesture that encompassed everyone present. "We are one galaxy, many species, many cultures, many voices, but one community. Let us go forward together with respect and curiosity and open hearts. Thank you for this extraordinary month. Thank you for reminding me why art matters. Thank you for being part of this moment in history." The applause was overwhelming. It went on for 15 minutes. People chanted Marcus's name and Earth's name. They cried and laughed and held each other. When it finally subsided, the audience began to file out slowly, reluctant to let the moment end. Many stopped to thank Marcus personally as they passed. He shook countless hands and tentacles and appendages. He accepted embraces from species whose body language he barely understood. Finally, the auditorium was empty, except for Marcus and his core team. Patricia, Claire, Ben, and Kyle stood together on the stage looking exhausted but triumphant. "We did it," Patricia said. "Against all odds and on an impossible timeline, we actually did it." "You did it," Kyle corrected, looking at Marcus. "We just helped." Marcus shook his head. "No, this was never about me. It was about all of us working together toward a common goal." He looked at each of them in turn. "I could not have done this without you. Thank you for believing in me when I did not believe in myself." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Ben spoke up. "So what happens now? The festival is over. What comes next?" Marcus had been thinking about that question. "The Galactic Council has already approached me about organizing the next festival 5 years from now, on the Melodian homeworld. They want me to serve as a consultant. Several species have invited me to visit their worlds and advise on cultural exchange programs. There is more work to be done if I want it." "And do you?" Kyle asked. "Want it?" Marcus smiled. "Yes, I think I do. But not immediately. First, I need time to process what we have accomplished, to rest and to reflect. Then we will see what the future holds." Patricia put a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever you decide, you will have support. You have proven yourself not just as a musician, but as a leader and a diplomat. The galaxy needs people like you." Over the following weeks, Earth returned to something resembling normal. The alien visitors departed carrying memories and recordings and new perspectives. The specialized venues were dismantled or converted to other uses. The city cleaned up and life resumed its regular patterns. But something fundamental had changed. Earth had proven itself capable of hosting a major galactic event. Humanity had earned respect and recognition as a species with cultural value to offer. Marcus received countless awards and honors. Universities offered him teaching positions. Governments wanted him to serve as a cultural ambassador. Media outlets requested interviews. He declined most of these opportunities, choosing instead to focus on smaller, more personal projects. He began working with young musicians, both human and alien, who showed exceptional talent. He established a scholarship fund to support artists who faced financial barriers. He collaborated with the harmonics who were still dying out, but no longer felt their legacy would be lost. Kyle accepted a position with the Veltharan Embassy as a cultural liaison. He had discovered a gift for bridging human and alien perspectives, and he wanted to develop it further. Before he left Earth, he came to see Marcus one last time. They met in the music room of Marcus's suite, where so much of the planning for the festival had taken place. Kyle looked different, more mature, more confident. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by genuine humility and purpose. "I wanted to thank you one more time," Kyle said, "for seeing something in me that no one else did, for giving me a chance to become someone better." Marcus smiled. "You did the hard work of changing. I just opened a door. You walked through it." Kyle nodded. "I have been thinking about that night when I challenged you, about how cruel I was and how close I came to destroying something precious. If you had not been strong enough to play, despite my mockery, if you had let me intimidate you into failure, the entire course of both our lives would be different." Marcus considered. "This. Perhaps. But I think things happen the way they are meant to. Your cruelty came from pain and emptiness. You were searching for meaning even if you did not know it, and I needed a push to stop hiding from my abilities. In a strange way, we helped each other." They talked for another hour about Kyle's new position and the challenges he would face. Marcus offered advice and encouragement. When Kyle finally left, Marcus stood at the window and watched him disappear into the city below. He felt proud and a little sad, but mostly he felt grateful that their paths had crossed. Months passed. Marcus continued his work quietly and without fanfare. He performed occasionally, but always in small, intimate settings where the focus was on connection rather than spectacle. He taught and mentored and slowly built a network of artists who shared his vision of music as a bridge between worlds. One evening, he received a message from the harmonics. It was delivered in pure sound frequencies that only he could fully perceive. They thanked him for honoring the gift they had given him. They told him that because of his work at the festival, 3 young harmonics had been successfully born. The publicity and attention had led to funding for research into protecting their species from industrial noise. There was hope now where before there had been only decline. Marcus wept when he received this news. He had carried guilt for years about accepting the harmonics gift while their species died out. To know that his actions had contributed, however indirectly, to their survival, filled him with joy he could barely contain. He went to his music room and picked up his violin. He played not the seventh spiral or any formal composition, but simple melodies that came from his heart. Songs of gratitude and hope and peace. The building responded, glowing softly in warm colors. The music floated through the open windows and out into the night, where it mixed with the sounds of the city. Car engines and conversations and the hum of life continuing in all its messy, beautiful complexity. Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. The years of training and dedication, the gift from the harmonics that had been both blessing and curse, the long fall into despair and homelessness, the cruel challenge from a young man that had sparked his redemption, the festival that had changed not just his life but the relationship between Earth and the galaxy.